Thank you, Wenjun, for having me here. Um, I enjoy so much working with you at the Global Institute, and it's been really fun. And I'm looking forward to see what you do next. Yes, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in the '60s. I was born in 1959. So in the late '60s, you know, sort of later part of the '60s, I was hearing some music. My grandfather brought home jazz records, but also my brother and I were into all the soul music from Motown, from Detroit, Stevie Wonder, The Temptations, you know, the Supremes, um, all those artists, amazing. And we also got into B.B. King and all the blues players. We liked rock and roll because it was really happening in the '60s. It was being really created.
Yeah.
So we heard Jimi Hendrix also, and the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Cream, and the Who, and bands like that.
Yeah.
And that was connected to the blues too, because all the English musicians
Right.
were really blues fanatics, and they were historians. They collected a lot of blues. So all these things were happening, and then I heard jazz because my grandfather brought home some records when I was about 10, and I heard Wayne on Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers Mosaic. I heard also Ron Carter, and I heard Ray Brown. I heard some Monk on a record, and I heard some Jimmy Smith organ,
Mhm.
Ray Charles, the record Genius plus Soul equals Jazz. A lot of records, and I didn't understand it. I felt something strong emotionally, but I had no idea what was going on yet. I think my brother was important because my brother was 3 years older than me, and he started playing guitar. So we were playing just by ear and stuff. I mean, he had a teacher that was teaching him how to learn to read, but I tried the guitar for a short time and I hated it because I'm left-handed and I was playing right-handed, and the pick, it didn't feel good. And reading out of books, I hated it because I had a good ear, but I couldn't read. So I started hearing records and falling in love with different music. And by the time we got to California in the early '70s, uh, I met my mentor, this guy named Chris Paler, or it's spelled Polar, Poehler. Chris taught me about a lot about jazz. He introduced me to a lot of great records, also soul records too, with Chuck Rainey and on bass, and Willie Weeks on the Donny Hathaway live record. He exposed me to Chick Corea's music, the Miles Group with Ron Carter and Tony Williams and Herbie. He started like making cassette tapes of his records for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a big deal. And in the Bay Area, there was a lot of jazz groups coming through San Francisco. So when my brother started being able to drive, he would after a while, he would take me in, and we would see. I saw Dizzy Gillespie, I saw McCoy Tyner's group, I saw Art Blakey's band, I saw the Count Basie band, I saw uh, Thad Jones Mel Lewis big band, which later became the Vanguard band in New York. Um, I saw a lot of people play. I even saw at towards the end of my high school career, I saw Bill Evans Trio with Eddie Gomez and I think Elliot Ziegman on the drums. So I saw a lot of music. It was quite intense to
Yeah.
be, to hear that music up close, young. And then, yeah, I started to play in my brother's band when I was in high school, and we played all kind of music. We played everything from blues to rock and roll to funk and bebop. It was everything. So that was really cool, and even out avant-garde music a little bit too. We started playing, and so then when I went to college, my teacher, Chris, my mentor, said you have to go study classical bass at San Francisco State with the maestro who was Charles Ciani, great uh, bass teacher and principal bass player of the opera.
Mhm.
So when my first semester of college, I was 17, and I was so scared because I came in and all these guys were playing all this classical stuff. I was more of a jazz guy. I was learning the bow, but not very experienced with it. And that year was a big, huge thing for me. All of a sudden, I had to really study classical bass for the first time, like every week, lessons. And he was really tough. He was a tough teacher and really, so I had to really catch up a lot to the other guys and try. And I had him for a year, and then we moved again to LA. And then I ran off and went on the road because my teacher wanted me to quit playing jazz and and electric bass and funk and all that, and he wanted me to be only symphonic bass player exclusively.
Hmm.
So I ran away. Yeah, and I did like everything. I didn't want to. I didn't want to necessarily give up classical music forever. I just didn't want to give up everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
I think it all influenced me a lot because even in high school, I was playing in the jazz band. I started to play in the orchestra. When I got to college, I played in an orchestra in the jazz band there at San Francisco State. Um, and I was around really good bass players for classical music and classical playing, but there was a lot of great jazz players. So I met a lot of people. People like Jay Anderson had just graduated. People like that are in the studios out in LA, like Jimmy Cox on the piano. Drummers like John Ferraro, who played with a lot of people and a lot of studio stuff. A lot of good musicians were in that group down there. I was starting to play a lot of gigs too, and I went after 3 years, and then I started also driving up to LA a little bit and playing some sessions in the gospel scene, like Christian music. Um, and so then I also started playing in like bands that were playing with people who were from South America, Afro Latin music, whether it was from, you know, Puerto Rican kind or a little Cuban stuff. And, so I was hearing of that. And then I started getting involved with, fell in with Brazilian musicians. And that was like amazing for me. Actually, Brazilian music was the first of those musics from South America where I really went in deep. I was about 23 when I got the gig with Ayrton Moreira, and he started teaching me about that was huge. And I, it wasn't like I had a worked out plan. It
Hmm.
just, I mean, I had an interest and I was open and I loved a lot of music, but I didn't. It wasn't like I said, "Okay, now I'm going to work on this and then that." You know, as I started to get involved in more musics, then I started to have more of a plan because I realized I like this music, but I don't understand it yet. So now I have to jump in and learn more. And in that time, not that many that played both acoustic and electric, or in my case, I started off on electric and then I added the acoustic. And there were even fewer who played jazz and rock music and all that, ethnic music, and then also played classical music. So I got a lot more opportunities because um, I fell in love with a lot of different musics, and I was trying to learn as much as I could, about as many of them as I could, because I would just, there were certain records that really inspired me, and I wanted to be able to play in that style. Those early Wes Montgomery records with Ron Carter were huge for me. Tequila, Down Here on the Ground, um, a record called California Dreamin'. Um, and they were sort of fairly for him. They were a little bit more commercial. But because it was blues influenced, Wes Montgomery's music pulled me right in, and the phrasing and Ron Carter's swinging, man, oh my gosh. So Oscar Peterson trio, and Ray Brown, and I saw Ray Brown play when I was fairly young, so I got into hearing Ray like on Live from Chicago, and then of course there's records like We Get Requests, or
Yeah.
there's so many great records that the trio made. Um, Night Train, all these records that Ray. And then I also used to see Ray on TV. Ray played in the Merv Griffin show in the 70s. It was different, there was more jazz on TV then. Um, I remember living in Northern California and being very young, probably about 13, and there was a broadcast on public television of, uh, I think it was like a broadcast that had been taped and recorded previously from the Newport Jazz Festival up in Rhode Island. And I remember seeing, it was one of the first times I saw an acoustic bass player like on a video, you know. And I believe it was Victor Gaskin. I think he was playing with Cannonball Adderley or something. And I saw somebody playing the big bass, and I was like, wow, you know, like, man. And then, of course, after that, I saw Ray on TV. But that made a big impression on me, you
Yeah.
know, those things. And then going to see people live. I saw Rufus Reed play live with the Thad Jones and Mel Lewis Orchestra. I saw Eddie Gomez play with Bill Evans. I remember seeing, when I was in college, I saw Dave Holland play with Sam Rivers. You know, Sam Rivers, the tenor player, and he played flute, and you know, and Steve Ellington played drums, and that was more avant-garde music and really great. I also saw Old and New Dreams live with Charlie Hayden, Don Cherry, Ed Blackwell,
Yeah.
and Dewey Redman. I grew up in Brooklyn, and not far from me, I didn't know it at the time until I met some of them later, but like Freddie Hubbard and who I played with later in LA. A lot of those musicians, including Max Roach, Freddie Hubbard, Joe Henderson, a lot of people were living in Brooklyn
Hmm.
when I was growing up. I just didn't know it.
Oh,
It's crazy.
yeah.
So it was in the air. Jazz was all around me. It was inevitable. It found me, you know.